Welcome to the Occult London podcast. This is a new podcast dedicated to exploring magic, mysticism, the Kabbalah, as well as other topics. If you like the podcast, please write a review and rate us on iTunes, as it will really help us to get this message out there. Also, be sure to visit our website at www.occultlondon.co.uk, where you can subscribe to the show. If anyone has any questions for me, then I'd love to hear from them, so please reach out via Facebook or an email, as I'd love to answer your questions. You can find my Facebook on the show notes, or alternatively email me at occultlondonpodcast@gmail.com. Hope you enjoy it. In today's episode, we are introducing a new series of episodes based on the four powers of the Sphinx. One of the key points that's related to the practice of magic and also becoming a magician is the maxim known as the four powers of the Sphinx. And although the origin of these words or tenets is unclear, they have a really good usefulness in terms of highlighting what it is to be a magician and also how to be a magician, and how we can incorporate these philosophies into our life to understand ourselves and ultimately help us to achieve gnosis, or nothi suton, which is know thyself. The words are as follows: to know, to will, to dare, and to keep silent. And each of these we will be covering in the upcoming episodes. In terms of just a quick introduction to those four. So obviously, to know, this is the rule that tells us to learn knowledge and to apply it, but it's also knowledge of self, obviously. So it's gnosis, knowing. To will, this is this power of, really being able to action and actualize things. So, to take something from an idea and put it into action. To dare, this is the daring power of the courageous, and also to learn not to be afraid. And then finally, to be silent. This is the power of discrimination and being able to keep the silence, and also to hear that inner voice that we all have within us, which is really the key to the mysteries from that point of view, that, finding that silence so you can hear that inner voice, which is increasingly difficult in today's modern society. So those are the four powers of the Sphinx that normally are discussed. In some traditions, they do have a fifth power, which is to go, and this is something that Crowley talks about, and also some other traditions also talk about that. But I'm not going to focus on that particular one in this series, as I want to primarily focus on the four powers. So where does this come from? So, the four powers of the Sphinx, it's often described as the witch's pyramid as well within, more kind of Wiccan traditions. But it's a magical idea and philosophy that sort of predates the modern magical revival. And it was really kind of first discussed by the French occultist and magician Eliphas Levi, who lived between 1810 and 1875, in his book Transcendental Magick, its Doctrine and Ritual, where he wrote, "To attain the sanctum regnum, in other words, the knowledge and power of the Magi, there are four indispensable conditions: an intelligence illuminated by study, an intrepidity which nothing can check, a will which cannot be broken, and a prudence which nothing can corrupt, and nothing intoxicates. To know, to dare, to will, to keep silence. Such are the four words of the Magus, inscribed upon the symbolical forms of the Sphinx." Eliphas Levi also goes on to say the following, which I thought was quite relevant as well. "You must thoroughly understand the elemental beings are souls of an imperfect type, not yet raised in the scale up to human existence, and that they can only manifest power when called into action by the adept as auxiliaries to his will. by means of that universal astral fluid in which they live. The kingdom of the gnomes is assigned to the north, the salamanders to the south, the sylphs to the east, and the undines to the west. Their symbols are of Taurus the bull for gnomes, Leo the lion for salamanders, the eagle for sylphs, and the sign of Aquarius for undines. The combination of these four types of face and being represents the created universe, a complete and eternal entity. Man, in fact, the microcosm, and this is the first formula of the mystical explanation of the enigma of the Sphinx. So yeah, I mean, he's talking about the Sphinx and obviously this relationship with the elementals there. So obviously the gnome, the salamanders, the sylphs, and the undines, and how that relates to the concept of the microcosm and the macrocosm. So obviously man being the microcosm, and the world or the universe or the heavens being the macrocosm, and that if we follow the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus or the divine Pymander, you have these concepts of as above so below. It talks about this in the Emerald Tablet as well. So as above so below, it's these interplay of man and the cosmos and the universe. And Levi seems to be saying that through this power of the Sphinx and through these elemental things conjoined into the image of the Sphinx, this is a formula for the mystical explanation of the universe, really. So man is similar to the Sphinx in that we're made up of the four elements. However, in mankind, these elements are not always balanced, and thus we're more led by them rather than being their master. So if you think about all our emotions, how we act, how we think, it's constantly switching between different thoughts, different feelings, and everything like that, which can kind of create quite a chaotic atmosphere in our lives. So the four powers of the Sphinx thus kind of represent this kind of purification and balancing out of all the four words of the Kabbalah, but also the Tetragrammaton, perfectly aligned within the human form. So how do we apply these principles? Well, Eliphas Levi talks about this in his final book, which is called The Great Secret, which is worth reading. And he says the following: "The great secret of magic, the unique and incommunicable arcana, has for its purpose the placing of supernatural power at the service of the human in some way. To attain such an achievement, it is necessary to know what has to be done, to will what is required, to dare what must be attempted, and to keep silent with discernment." Levi goes on to give us a mythical example, which is quite relevant, which I wanted to share, when he says, talks about Homer's Odysseus. Homer's Odysseus had to contend with the gods, the elements, the Cyclops, the Sirens, Circe, etc. That is to say, with all the difficulties and dangers of life. His palace is invaded, his wife is pestered, his goods are plundered, his death is resolved on. He loses his comrades, his ships are sunk. At last, he alone is left to fight it out against the night and the sea. And single-handed he sways the gods. He escapes from the sea, he blinds the Cyclops, he cheats the Sirens, he masters Circe. He retakes his palace. He rescues his wife. He slays those plotting his death, because he willed to see Ithaca and Penelope again, because he always knew how to extricate himself from danger, because he dared what had to be done, and because he always kept silent when it was not expedient to speak. So what he's talking about here is obviously, Odysseus is a real warrior. He goes out there, he dares, he goes into danger deliberately in order to, attain this kind of grail of achievement. And he follows his will. So he's a very strong willpower. He's also daring, and he's also building up his knowledge. So he's kind of, from that point of view, he's almost like bringing fire down from heaven from that point of view. He's going out there, he's exploring this unknown world, he's defeating these unknown beasts or monsters and bringing that knowledge back, which is part of the journey of the initiate from that point of view. You bring back what you have found. So it's very much about bringing this fire down from heaven. Levi gives us practical information on it as well, because he says, when one does not know, one should will to learn. To the extent that one does not know, it is foolhardy to dare. But it is always well to keep silent. So as we can see, we start the process by wanting to learn. So that's kind of the first step, really. We have the will to learn. And through learning, we begin to know. And then also, once you know, you can kind of be more daring, really, because you can know the risks potentially, and you can also kind of say we've overcome this obstacle, so let's dare and do that next one. And then obviously keeping silent as well, and we'll talk about that in a bit more detail in terms of each individually one of these. But one of the things you can kind of think of this is really a step ladder. So it's it's different steps that one can follow in order to achieve these things. We must learn or know before we will. To learn how to will is to learn how to exercise dominion. But to be able to exert willpower, you must first know. For willpower applied to folly is madness, death, and hell. And he also says, in order to dare, we must know. In order to will, we must dare. We must will to possess empire, and to reign, we must be silent. So, as I said, we'll be going through these in more detail individually in the next coming episodes. But hopefully this has given you a bit of a flavour of what these mean and how we can kind of apply these into our lives. In terms of how these have been impacted on the kind of magical tradition, you can find these in, some of the Golden Dawn material talks about this. So there's a lecture that was printed by Francis King in his book Modern Ritual Magic from the Official History Lecture, which was written by William Westcott, that was issued to all neophytes within the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which said the following: "Be well assured, my frater, that the Order of the Golden Dawn, of which you have now become a member, can show you the way to much secret knowledge and to much spiritual progress. We believe lead true and patient students who can, will, dare, learn and be silent to the true wisdom and perfect happiness." Crowley also incorporated these concepts into Thelema. He also introduces this fifth element, which is to go, which we're not really going to talk about, but represented spirit. And you can see the concepts in some of his rituals, such as Liber Pyramidos, where the candidate invokes and becomes Osiris. And also we can find it in Wicca and Witchcraft as well. So it is mentioned by Paul Huson in Mastering Witchcraft in 1976, which he doesn't reference it directly, but he does talk about these four powers, which were a virulent imagination, a will of fire, rock hard faith, and a flair for secrecy. And yes, it's kind of the same concepts, but they've just been slightly adapted. As is the case with a lot of different magical systems, there's been quite a lot of disagreement and variations on the meaning of the four powers of the Sphinx, and also switching them around from an elemental perspective. So I'm probably not going to be talking too much about them from the perspective of which one represents which element. I think there's an awful lot we can learn just looking at them from how they would impact our behaviours and how we can use them to understand ourselves, rather than saying this one should be fire, this one should be water, etc., etc. So yeah, that's all we've got time for today. I hope everyone enjoys it. As I said, the next 4 episodes we'll be talking about each individual aspect of the 4 powers of the Sphinx, so I hope you stay tuned and listen to them, and I'll catch you up with you soon. Thanks very much. Bye bye.
Our mind, silver soul enshrined.